You know it's this. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowing like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look me better. Put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheap again.
Hello guys, welcome back to MangaMuse. We are thrilled to have you back with us today in the last part of, which is part 18 of What If Deku Meets the Powerpuff Girls. Also make sure to check the wonderful author ChiWriter on FANFICTION.net. Now smash the like, share, comment, subscribe and also press the bell icon so that you never miss an update. Well, with that said, now let's straight dive into the story.
On the streets. The night was winding down, and faint cheers of hope and victory drifted through the city. But for the small group walking along the quiet street, all of that distant celebration felt muffled, drowned out by the heavy silence surrounding them. Down the streets. Buttercup, Blossom, Bubbles, and Izuku moved in a loose formation, the girls hanging back while Izuku walked alone at the front. He was downtrodden, quiet, and hadn't spoken a single word since they started walking. The girls kept a short distance behind him, Buttercup in the middle with Blossom and Bubbles on either side, all three watching the boys' slow, silent steps. They exchanged looks, unsure what to say or do. Bubbles had whispered her worries, wondering what could have happened, while Blossom remained tense and thoughtful. Buttercup's eyes never left Izuku's back, tracking every movement with concern. Only an hour and a half earlier, they had, along with the crowd, had been watching the broadcast of All Might's battle against All for One. Buttercup had wanted, eagerly, to fly out there and whoop the villains but herself as payback, but Blossom had been firm in stating that this wasn't their fight, and stepping in would only complicate things. Buttercup was not happy about that, having some anger she wanted to release at him, in him's place, but let it go. So they stayed and watched on the screen, as the two figures clashed, every blow and every surge of power caught clearly by the news cameras. They'd also noticed, on screen, that the other villains involved during the raid had safely gotten away, and although Bubbles felt guilty, none of that mattered once the battle took an unexpected turn. In the middle of the fight, suddenly, steam came out of All Might's body, and in a blink, the towering muscular hero collapsed back into the frail, skeletal man the girls recognized from school. The shock hit them hard. And it wasn't just them, Tokyo, maybe all of Japan, seemed to collectively gasp at the sight of their symbol of peace looking so weak, so sickly. Not in the supposed form that they all gathered to know as the symbol of peace. Blossom had been seconds from rushing to help him, and the other two would have followed without question. But then the cheers started, waves of encouragement from the crowd. Something in the tone, in the hope behind those voices, struck the girls with a deep sense of nostalgia. It felt like Townsville again, like all those moments when ordinary people placed their faith in them as heroes. It was at that moment that some of the pro-heroes arrived, sans midnight, from the raid soon after, moving civilians away from danger. But the fight itself raged on. All for One morphed his arm into a grotesque, spiked limb, clearly preparing a final, lethal strike. But All Might didn't back down. He stood firm, fist raised, refusing to fall. Then came the moment that changed everything. His body swelled again into his muscular form, but different this time, tighter, fueled purely by determination and whatever remnants of power he had left. He looked older, fiercer, but more resolute than ever. With every ounce of strength he had mastered over the years, he launched forward and delivered a devastating punch that brought All for One crashing into the ground. The impact shook the battlefield. When the dust cleared, All for One lay unconscious, and All Might stood tall with his fist raised in triumph. The eruption of cheers from across Japan was deafening. Even the girls couldn't help but be impressed. As Buttercup walked now, DMN, she found herself thinking with real respect. Muscles really went all out, huh? But her admiration shifted quickly as her eyes returned to Izuku. He walked stiffly, silently, his emotions hidden except for the slump of his shoulders. Izuku's mind had been a storm throughout the entire broadcast. He had feared desperately for his mentor, his idol. He had worried All Might would lose. He had worried that All for One's taunts about him had wounded his teacher. He felt guilt, fear, and helplessness mixing all at once. And when All Might finally defeated All for One, Izuku had wanted to feel joy. But then came All Might's final gesture. When he reverted to his weakened form and pointed to the camera, the world saw a warning to any remaining villains. Now it's your turn. A burst of cheers came out from the crowd as they heard their idol speak again, everyone happy to see All Might was still there. They felt even safer to the threat he gave to other villains, showing them he was ready for them as well. Izuku heard different than everyone else, his chest swelling in pain and agony to what it really meant. I have nothing left in me. The realization had hit him like a hammer. The weight of being the next symbol of peace. The responsibility of one for all. The expectation. The fear. The events of tonight. the future suddenly move onto his shoulders. It was too much. The dread churned inside him until he couldn't hold it back anymore, and he broke down. He didn't even care that he was crying in front of the other girls, couldn't even hear as they called out to him, questioning if he was all right. He just cried harder, hard enough to shake him, because the truth had finally settled in. He was next. And now, even as the cheers of victory faded behind them, the weight of that reality clung to him with every step. He was the next holder of the symbol of peace, the quirk. Buttercup was just about to walk up to Izuku, ready to talk to him about everything that had happened before, everything he had seen, everything weighing on him, when a sudden shout cut across the street. "Everyone, over here!" All four turned, even Izuku slowing to a halt, though his face remained unchanged, as Momo, Todoroki, Koda, and Bakugou were rushing toward them, each wearing a different emotion: confusion, worry, annoyance, and leftover adrenaline from obviously watching the whole battle. Momo reached them first. "I'm so glad you're all right. What happened? Where have you?" More importantly, Todoroki cut her off, eyes sharpening. His gaze slid directly to Bubbles, who stiffened. She was the one who had knocked them all out during the earlier chaos. "How did you get away from there?" "The villains, the scene, it doesn't add up," letting the implication hang in the air. Bubbles didn't answer. She lowered her eyes to her hands, suddenly feeling very small. Then Bakugou exploded. "What the hell happened back there?" His voice cracked with fury born from the fight he missed, the humiliation of being knocked out, and the brutal shock of watching All Might wither on live television. The man he wanted to surpass, to prove that he was the best, one day. But he can't now, and it made him feel. He whirled toward Izuku instinctively, ready to spit more venom, but froze when he saw the boy's face. Izuku wouldn't look at him. Wouldn't look at anyone. He kept his eyes on the ground, his expression pinched, red, raw. Even Bakugou could see he'd been crying. The anger didn't disappear, but it faltered, confusion breaking through. Meanwhile, Koda rushed to Bubbles' side, gentle hands hovering as he whispered, "Hey, are you okay? Did you get hurt?" His voice trembled with worry. Bubbles blinked at him in surprise before melting into a relieved hug, burying her face against his chest, whispering to him that she was fine, though that was a little far from the truth. Momo looked around at the group, scanning each face. Buttercup looked physically fine, aside from her tattered clothing she was abducted in. Blossom and Bubbles also looked strangely unharmed. Not that she would wish them any sort of harm, but because both girls, most specifically Bubbles, was involved in a battle, she didn't know where Blossom even went to. And then there was Izuku, who looked shattered. After gathering her thoughts, she spoke up again. "I'm glad you're all okay," she said softly. Then her eyes flicked to Buttercup, worry and intrigue marring in her tone. "What about you? How did you escape? We didn't see you when Bakugou was transported. Where were you?" Buttercup shrugged with forced ease. "Trust me, I found a way out. Thanks to Izuku over there." She jerked her thumb toward him. He was sent there as well, so, yeah, deciding not to say any more than that. Momo's brows knit together, but before she could question further, she turned to Izuku. "Midoriya, when we were all transported, we thought that," she stopped herself, her voice faltering as she fully registered his posture. "Midoriya, what's wrong? Are you hurt?" No answer. Izuku's silence was like a physical weight. Bubbles lifted her head from Koda's shoulder, concern freezing her in place. Todoroki said nothing, eyes narrowing at the girls again, putting pieces together that didn't fit. Blossom exhaled slowly, stepping forward. "Guys, I think we've all had enough for one night." Her voice was calm but firm, the tone she used when she wanted control of a situation without fighting over it. "We accomplished what we went out to do. We found and rescued Buttercup and Bakugou. And we're all safe," she said diplomatically, essence of exhaustion from the night still crept in. "Right now, the pro-heroes and police can handle the rest. We should just go home, and deal with all of this later." "Okay?" There was some silence. Momo still looked like she wanted answers, real ones. But exhaustion won. Todoroki remained suspicious, gaze flickering between each of the girls. Koda, first to speak, loosened his hold on Bubbles and gave a small nod. I think Blossom is right. Everyone needs rest. Especially after everything." His voice was quiet, thoughtful, steady. It grounded the group more than any argument could. Momo finally agreed with a slow nod. Todoroki sighed but didn't push. "Fine." Bakugou just grumbled under his breath, the kind of frustrated growl that meant he was one bad moment from blowing up again. But he didn't argue. Bakugou scoffed a whatever, on not wanting to show the exhaustion and excitement of the night weigh him. He turned sharply and stomped off without a goodbye. The girls watched him go, unimpressed but not surprised. Koda ended up heading in the same direction as Izuku, and when the others began saying their goodbyes, he quietly drifted to the boys' side. He didn't say much, he rarely did, but the concern in his soft eyes was enough to make it clear he wasn't ready to let Izuku walk home alone just yet. After a small, hesitant wave to the remaining group, he stayed with him. The two boys set off together down the dimly lit street, their steps slow and heavy. Neither tried to fill the silence. They didn't need to. The weight of the night pressed quietly on both of them, settling into the spaces where words would have normally gone. Izuku kept his gaze fixed on the ground, shoulders curled inward, his breaths tight and uneven. Every few steps, Koda stole a glance at him, gentle, worried, wanting to help but unsure how. He opened his mouth once, maybe twice, but no words came. After everything that had happened, he knew that anything he said might only make the pain sharper. So he simply walked beside him. Todoroki and Momo gave brief farewells, Momo polite, Todoroki barely emotive, before heading toward the station. As they walked, Todoroki's voice drifted quietly to her ear. "You know they're keeping something from us." Momo didn't respond right away. Her eyes stayed ahead. Her mind, however, churned. Todoroki continued, "There are too many inconsistencies. Too many things that don't add up. How long are we going to pretend any of this is normal?" Momo finally sighed. "Todoroki, I understand your concern. I do. But tonight was overwhelming. For everyone. All of Japan is trying to process what we just witnessed." Her voice softened. "We can revisit everything tomorrow. For now I think we all need to breathe." Todoroki muttered a reluctant fine, and they walked on in shared silence. Back with the girls, the Powerpuffs made their way home without flying, their bodies too tired, their minds too heavy. The train ride was quiet, filled with the soft rumble of the tracks and a shared exhaustion none of them had the energy to voice. When they finally reached Midnight's residence, it already around 1 a.m., they slipped inside without many words. They freshened up, shedding the day's disguises and stress. Buttercup took an especially long bath, wanting every trace of grime and sweat gone. None of them wanted to talk tonight. None of them could. Instead, like when they were little, back in Townsville after long, terrible days, they all crawled into the same bed, huddled under the same blanket, letting the presence of each other be enough. Tomorrow, they would deal with everything. Now they just needed to rest. Morning arrived quietly, creeping in through the edges of the curtains long before the household stirred. The house was still enough that every creak of the floorboards and hum of the fridge seemed amplified. In the occupied bedrooms, Bubbles stirred awake. She hadn't been able to sleep. Her mind replayed the events of their little mission, cycling through flashes of the battle, emotions, and adrenaline. By the time she finally gave up on rest, it was already 5 o'clock. She sighed, "Well, this won't do," before she moved quietly, slipping out of bed in her nightgown, making sure not to jostle her sisters awake, as she headed to the kitchen. Her hair, fallen loose from its usual pigtails, cascaded over her shoulders as she set about preparing something simple to eat. Also realizing Blossom and surely Buttercup hadn't eaten much of yesterday, she made a fair amount of sandwiches, hot chocolate. She placed a small tray for herself. It was hardly a feast, but she hoped it might quiet the storm of thoughts and feelings swirling in her mind. Inevitably, she made a small mess, crumbs scattered across the counter, a faint ripple of chocolate spilling over the edge of the mug. Bubbles sat at the kitchen counter, took a bite of her food, as she sipped her beverage, staring into the distance. Her gaze was unfocused, and her posture slumped. She thought about everything that had happened, the fight she and the others were in, the villains she had fought, the momentary loss in control of her own powers. She shivered slightly at the memory of what she had done, what her abilities had unleashed. And then there was that strange, unsettling feeling, the one she couldn't understand, the lingering presence of All for One, something that had touched her without actually touching her, leaving her unsettled, confused. She was lost in her thoughts when the soft sound of a door opening made her tense, sending a ripple of caution through her. She was immediately on high alert, her body stiffening, heart racing, but when she saw who had entered, surprise and concern overtook her vigilance. It was Midnight herself. She stumbled in, still wearing her uniform, but it was battered and torn. Her hair was disheveled, the second layer of her costume ripped and tattered, fishnet sleeves hanging loose, and marks streaked across her skin. She looked defeated, too worn down to notice that someone was watching her. Ms. Kayama. The older woman's head snapped up, eyes widening in shock. She took a small, fragile step forward, then froze. "Bubbles," she whispered, her voice cracked and broken. Before she could say anything further, Bubbles was suddenly there, rushing forward and enveloping Midnight in a tight hug. "It's fine," Bubbles murmured into her chest. "We're fine. We're back." Instinctively, Midnight hugged her back, letting the warmth of the embrace steady her wobbling form. Then a question slipped out, almost before she could stop herself. but you mean Blossom, she's here too? Confusion painted her tone. She had expected the girls to still be at the Cat's Inn or the forest training camp after the chaos of the night. She hadn't considered they might have returned. Bubbles hesitated, then nodded softly. Not just Blossom, she said, letting the words hang before falling silent. Midnight's mind raced, still trying to comprehend, when voices drifted down the stairs. Bubbles. Blossom appeared first, her hair down and tousled from sleep, rubbing her eyes as she asked in a sleepy voice, "Are you making a snack or something?" "Geez, Bubbles," Buttercup muttered as she shuffled down the stairs. Still heavy with sleep and wearing pajama pants and a cropped shirt, she frowned. "I hope you made enough to apologize for waking me." She stopped mid-sentence. Completely froze. Midnight stood there in the kitchen entryway, uniform torn, hair tangled, skin marked with scratches, exhaustion clinging to every inch of her body. Midnight's breath hitched. "Buttercup?" Everything stopped. The girls. The air. The morning itself. Bubbles slowly released Midnight's arm, stepping back as she sensed the sudden shift in emotions, a mix of shock, fear, and relief so intense it hurt. And then Midnight moved. Despite the exhaustion weighing down her limbs, she rushed forward, arms trembling as she threw herself into Buttercup's arms and held on as if the girl might vanish again. Buttercup jolted, eyes widening at the intensity of the embrace. For a heartbeat, she stood stiff and startled, then softened, returning the hug with a gentler squeeze. Under her breath, barely audible, Midnight whispered, "You're safe." "Yeah," Buttercup murmured back, voice low and rough with sleep. "I'm fine." Midnight didn't let go for several long seconds. And Buttercup didn't make her. Blossom stepped aside to stand next to Bubbles, watching quietly. Bubbles leaned against her, eyes tired but warm, the two of them sharing a soft, knowing look. When the initial shock and relief finally eased, they drifted into the sitting room. Midnight lowered herself heavily onto the couch, still wearing her torn, soot-stained hero uniform. She looked like standing would snap her in half. The girls settled into the cushions across from her, uneasy but composed. Midnight stared at the girls as though her brain couldn't quite process the words she had just heard. She sat forward slowly, exhaustion clinging to her shoulders and weighing down her breaths. Only after a long, shaky exhale did she finally find her voice. "All right," she said quietly, the strain obvious. "Let me get this straight." Her gaze sharpened, tired, incredulous. "You two left the forest training grounds. Without my permission. Without Aizawa's permission. Without notifying any pro-hero. And you came all the way to Kamino Ward during one of the most dangerous operations we've seen this year?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Blossom straightened, her posture steady despite the still lingering fatigue etched into her face. "Yes, Ms. Kayama. We did." She held Midnight's gaze without flinching. "Bubbles and I couldn't stand back while Buttercup was taken. We had to do something." Something flickered in Midnight's expression, understanding, sympathy, before she pushed it down beneath her role as their guardian. "I can understand where you're coming from, I do. You were worried for your sister," she said, voice low but firm. "All of you were. And I know things were different where you're from." She gestured vaguely, unable to articulate different universe with her current energy. "But here, you can't just attempt a rescue mission on your own. What you did was reckless. No matter the outcome or goal." She leaned forward, expression tightening. "You left the grounds without notifying anyone. You had no backup. No plan approved by a pro-hero. And worse, an additional 3 of your peers followed you. 3 students who could have been seriously hurt." Bubbles quickly shook her head. We didn't ask them to come with us. We tried to tell them not to. We knew it was dangerous. We're sorry we disobeyed you." Midnight closed her eyes for a moment, jaw tight. "Yes, Bubbles. It was dangerous. That's the point." She pressed her hand to her temple. "You still went. All of you." "Oh, please." Buttercup scoffed, arms crossing. "You really expected me to sit around and wait while the pros handled it?" "Yeah, no. If we'd done that, I'd still be chained up in that place." Her words hit Midnight hard. The hero's shoulders flinched, and for a moment her anger cracked open, revealing something raw beneath. "Buttercup," her voice thinned, barely holding steady. "I'm glad you're back. I'm glad you're safe. But you have to understand, there are protocols for a reason." Buttercup cut her off with a sharp shake of her head. "Protocols don't matter when there are people in danger. When you're the one trapped. If it wasn't for my sisters, and our friends, I don't know how long I would have been stuck there. Or if I'd even." She stopped herself, but the implication lingered. The thing was, Buttercup really didn't know if she would have gotten out of there in time. She knew her sisters would have rescued her, eventually, but after how long? If it wasn't for Izuku, she might have not done what she did, or even done it in time. Though that is something she would not voice as of yet. Midnight inhaled slowly, absorbing the truth of that. I understand why you feel that way, she said, softer now. But what all of you did was incredibly dangerous. And you have to follow the rules here. This isn't optional. That earned a round of uneasy glances from the girls, none of them thrilled with the reminder that, in this world, their rules, no matter how stupid they were, actually mattered. That they weren't fully independent heroes anymore. That someone else was responsible for saving the day. Even if they were clearly capable of doing it themselves. And Midnight saw it. She saw the questioning gazes, the frustration, the defiance simmering under their forced calm. She also saw the gaps in their explanation, wide, suspiciously clean gaps. You're not telling me everything, she said quietly. Not accusing, just tired. And maybe I'm too exhausted to push right now. But I know there's more. Blossom's face remained composed, diplomatic. We told you the important parts. The rest isn't necessary for now. Midnight almost objected, her breath caught at the start of a retort, but she let it go. Her exhaustion won. Her worry won. Her love for them won. Instead, her expression softened in a way the girls almost never saw. Just she swallowed, voice trembling on the edges. Don't do something like this again. Please. I don't know if chances will be better next time. Even when she said that, she had a sinking feeling that it was taken more as a suggestion by them. The girls, for their part, just nodded along to what she asked. They really didn't want to upset the woman who had done so much for them, but after what they had faced throughout their lives up to now, they knew that not doing anything was not an option. Especially with how bold him was when it came to his games. Midnight let the last of her warning settle between them. She could see in their eyes that her plea had registered, but not in the way she hoped. They nodded, yes, but with the quiet certainty of girls who had already survived too much to ever stand still when danger called. She recognized that fire. It scared her more than she could admit. She exhaled and decided to change the subject. With an effort, she pushed herself up from the couch. Her legs wobbled, and she steadied herself with a quick clap of her hands, aiming for enthusiasm and landing somewhere near, exhausted substitute teacher trying her best. All right girls, she said, managing a strained smile. It's been a long night for everyone. I think we could all use some food. It's early morning anyway, so how about I make? She didn't get the rest out. Wait, Ms. Kayama. Bubbles shot to her feet so fast she nearly knocked into the coffee table. You must be really tired. I already made some food earlier, so we can take care of it. You can rest. Midnight was surprised at that, a little taken aback. Bubbles, it's fine, she said, trying to summon her authority back. I'm here, and I'm the adult. I'm supposed to make sure you three are fed. You've had a long day. Blossom rose more calmly. It's all right, Ms. Kayama. You haven't rested at all, unlike us. Her expression softened, though Midnight still caught the faint exhaustion hiding behind her composure. We'll handle the kitchen while you sit, eat, and rest. No, Blossom, really, I appreciate it, but... Buttercup cut in before she could finish. Blossom said what she said, Buttercup deadpanned, already heading for the kitchen. Anyway, I'm starving. She tossed a pointed look over her shoulder. And Bubbles, I swear, if you vacuumed up everything you cooked earlier and left us one sad little crumb. I did not. Bubbles huffed, marching after her. I shared. I always share. Blossom followed them with the air of someone knowingly walking into a storm. She muttered, please don't throw mixing bowls at each other, under her breath as she disappeared into the kitchen. And just like that, the three of them were gone, leaving a wide-eyed, slack-jawed Midnight staring after them. She let out a long, disbelieving breath and collapsed back into the couch. I'm the guardian, she muttered, rubbing her eyes. I'm supposed to be taking care of them. Yet here she was, being shooed into resting like an overtired toddler. Despite the absurdity, a tiny smile tugged at her mouth. Maybe this is what being a parent feels like, she thought. Not the biological kind, she knew she wasn't that. But emotionally? In all the ways that mattered? Then the events of the entire mission resurfaced, causing her to face all her mistakes she made. Guilt crept in, hearing Endeavor's sharp words from earlier echoed unpleasantly in her head. After everything that happened today, she wasn't sure she'd done enough. She wasn't sure she could do enough. Her body soon settled deeper into the couch, heaviness tugging at her limbs. Just a moment, she told herself. Just a few minutes to sleep finally claimed her before she could finish that thought. It was only a little while later when the girls returned. Bubbles came through, carrying a tray of a small plate of food she had rustled up and a mug of hot soothing green tea, with Blossom and Buttercup following right behind her. All right, Ms. Kayama, Bubbles said brightly as they stepped into the living room. We brought you something to eat. We hope. She stopped, and all three pairs of eyes landed on the couch. Midnight was sprawled across the couch, head tilted against the cushion, breathing soft and even. Out cold. Well, Buttercup said under her breath, guess we're feeding her later. Without saying anything else, Blossom stepped out. A minute later she returned, arms carrying a folded blanket in one arm and a small pillow held tightly in one hand. Buttercup and Bubbles stayed back, silently watching. Blossom lowered the pillow first, sliding a hand beneath Midnight's head to ease it into place. Midnight barely stirred, only exhaling a little deeper. Then Blossom shook out the blanket and laid it carefully over her, smoothing it over her shoulders, tucking the edges lightly around her. When she finished, Blossom stepped back and whispered, "Let's give her some time. She needs this." Bubbles nodded immediately, and Buttercup just muttered, "Yeah. Probably more than she'll ever admit." Blossom turned off the living room light, leaving only the faint glow from the hallway. Together, the girls stepped quietly out of the room. The tray of food sat untouched on the coffee table. Blossom glanced at it once but said nothing. They could reheat it later. Midnight deserved every minute of rest she could steal. In the dimness of the kitchen, the girls settled in for their early breakfast. Bubbles plated what she'd made earlier. Buttercup sat slumped at the table, chin in her hand, still looking tired and too wrung out to voice it. Blossom leaned against the counter, waiting. Soon they ate in silence. Takoba Municipal Beach Park. The sun wasn't even fully up, and already Izuku was sprinting down Takoba Beach like his life depended on it. No one who saw him would have believed this was the same boy who'd barely slept in days, whose combined rest over the last 48 hours barely scraped 4 hours, and whose entire year felt like a collection of sleepless nights stacked on top of each other. But exhaustion didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the message on his phone from All Might, urgently calling for him. No details. No explanation. Just enough to make Izuku's heart lurch into his throat, imagining every possible terrible scenario about All Might's condition after the fight. He'd bolted from his house instantly, shoes half on, tears stinging his eyes as his mother called after him in confusion and worry. He didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not until he knew All Might was alright. By the time he crossed half the city and hit the sand, he was panting so hard his lungs burned. The morning air was cold, damp with ocean mist, each breath scraping against his throat. But then, he saw him. A thin figure in the distance, silhouetted by the pale rising sun. Bandages wrapped around his torso. An arm secured in a sling. Still frail. Still gaunt. But standing and alive. Izuku's breath hitched, a wave of emotion crashed over him so suddenly he almost stumbled, relief, fear, guilt, all muddled together until tears welled up without warning. All Might, he shouted, voice cracking. The figure turned sharply at the sound of his name. Even from far away, Izuku saw the way All Might's shoulders lifted, the way his expression softened as recognition struck. Midoriya. All Might called back, raising his free hand. You made it. His pace quickened, not a run, not with his injuries, but a hurried, eager walk that was almost comical for someone who once crossed city blocks in a single leap. But who could blame him? Not now. Not after everything. Izuku barely made it 3 steps before a thud cracked across the empty beach. Izuku's vision snapped white as he was punched clean across the face. He hit the sand with a choked yelp, hands flying up to his cheek, hot tears springing out instantly from shock. All Might, bandaged, exhausted, barely holding himself together, was still somehow shouting with all the fury he had left. You idiot. Izuku blinked through tears, trembling, confused. All Might? You reckless, stubborn boy. All Might roared, stomping toward him. You shouldn't have been there. You shouldn't have put yourself, or anyone else, in danger like that. Izuku shook his head, trying to get up, trying to explain, but his voice broke before it began. I couldn't stand by. I couldn't let Keikaken and Buttercup. It was still a rash decision. All Might snapped, voice cracking with something between frustration and fear. You could have gotten yourself killed. Again. Izuku swallowed hard. He wanted to protest, to say he didn't get hurt, but that would be false. The memories of that fight he was in, was still fresh in his mind. He could still remember the struggle it was, the feigning feeling of the new power, the intense beatings he endured, and the choking, his throat sealing up on him but their hands. Words dissolved before they ever reached his mouth, and Izuku found himself shaking from the experience. And then suddenly, 2 arms wrapped around him. Izuku jolted, caught off guard, as All Might pulled him into a hug, bandaged ribs pressing uncomfortably against him. I'm so glad you made it out, All Might muttered, voice trembling despite the smile he tried to wear. You're improving so much, you're growing so fast, I'm proud of you. Izuku's tears returned, but not from joy. Something else. Something tight and suffocating. He tried to breathe around it. All Might didn't notice. He just laughed weakly and squeezed again. You're such a crybaby. Come on, I told you to be stronger than this. You're the holder of my powers now. You must be strong. His arms tightened around Izuku's shoulders, then his neck, just enough pressure to mimic a hold. And that's all it took. A flash of memory, hands crushing his throat, a voice snarling, the world dimming at the edges. Izuku gasped. A sharp, broken inhale tore out of him as the beach vanished into white noise panic. Kid? All Might called out, pulling back to give a questioning look at the boy. Midoriya? What's wrong? Izuku steadied his breathing, trying to calm himself, so as to speak. Before he could even say anything, it seemed like the momentary episode clawed up his throat before he could stop it. He also couldn't bring himself to voice what he presumed to be fears. For he stared at the man. The one who risked so much to entrust him with this gift. He looked into his sunken eyes, the empty smile stretched thin over worry, the weight of a dying legacy looking at him like a burden he wasn't ready to carry. He tried to speak. Nothing came. I'm sorry, All Might, was all he managed to choke out. All Might misread it instantly. Don't worry, he said softly, placing his hands on Izuku's shoulders. I'll devote everything I have left to raising you. To making sure you become the next symbol of peace. He smiled with all the confidence he wished he had. But Izuku felt something tighten painfully in his chest, like the words were shackles linking him to a future he wasn't sure he could survive. He nodded dumbly into All Might's shoulder, unable to say anything else. Unable to breathe normally. Unable to escape the pressure of expectations he was drowning under. The boardroom. Days passed, but the uproar refused to die. If anything, it grew, nervous, restless, electric. Word of All Might's retirement had spread through every corner of Japan and far beyond. News anchors repeated it with shaky voices. Social feeds buzzed with speculation. Neighborhoods whispered. Schools murmured. Families sat in stunned silence. The symbol of peace was gone. Some celebrated his survival, but most felt the ground shift beneath their feet. Without that towering figure standing between them and chaos, the world suddenly felt colder. And everyone knew villains would sense the same opportunity, would come crawling out of darkness now that the brightest light had gone out. Two institutions felt the pressure more than anyone, the National Police Agency and the Hero Public Safety Commission. Inside the commission's main boardroom, the atmosphere was suffocating. A long, polished table gleamed beneath harsh white lights, surrounded by the highest-ranking board members, senior officers from the police force, and several of Japan's selected, top heroes, summoned urgently, without explanation. Now they sat, tense and sleepless, as the discussion spiraled. This is not good, one board member said at last, breaking the heavy silence. His voice cracked despite his attempt at authority. The symbol of peace has retired, and now the world knows he could be defeated. We don't have him anymore. Not really. Another board member leaned forward, fingers digging into her binder. Agreed. This situation is terrible. The villains showed us exactly what they are capable of. The incident proved how unprepared we were. Murmurs rippled down the table, worry sharpening into something close to panic. A police commissioner slammed his palm onto the wood. The room jolted. His jaw was tight, eyes red with exhaustion and grief. My men went into that raid believing we had a chance, he said, each word shaking. And they didn't come back. A high number, too high. I had to face the families myself and tell them their loved ones wouldn't be returning home. He cut himself off, breath shuddering, hands curling into fists. The silence that followed was heavy with respect, guilt, and the unspoken weight of failure. Even though all for one had been captured and victims rescued, the victory tasted hollow. A win etched in BLD. Voices began rising again, frustration, fear, arguments tangling over each other, until a sharp, authoritative tone cut through them. Enough. MDM President of the Hero Commission straightened in her chair, her presence alone enough to silence the room. Her expression was grave, but controlled, steel-wrapped in calm. I understand, she said quietly, but the evenness of her voice demanded attention. All of it. The pain. The anger. The uncertainty. Believe me, I do. This is not an ideal outcome, for any of us. The room waited, breath held. But we must continue. And we must prepare for what comes next. Her gaze swept across the table, weighing each face. The era of peace has ended. A chill spread through the room. And we, she continued, are about to enter a war. Shock broke in waves, disbelieving gasps, immediate protests. A war? You can't be serious? This is madness. Japan can't withstand another. But she raised a hand, and the room fell silent again. It is inevitable, she said simply. But, her eyes sharpened. I believe we have opportunities before us. Tools we have not yet fully utilized. Confusion flickered among the board, the police, even the heroes. Then the president looked toward one of the pro-heroes at the table and gave a single, deliberate nod. The hero rose, walked to the projection screen at the front of the room, and inserted a flash drive into the console. The screen flickered to life. First came footage of the Nomu attack, grainy, chaotic, and devastating. The creature rampaging through streets. Bodies lying motionless in its wake. Emergency crews scrambling behind barricades. The sheer scale of destruction filled the room with a suffocating sense of déjà vu. No one spoke. Many looked away. Others stared with clenched jaws and burning eyes. Then MDM president gestured again. The hero fast-forwarded, and the footage jumped to the next scene where she was most interested in. The giant Nomu being attacked. And although the figure was fast and out of focus at times, it was clear to everyone in the room, it was a person fighting the creature with ease. The frame froze, and gasps echoed. Some leaned forward. Others stiffened in their seats. MDM president rose slowly from her chair, the glow of the screen painting her face in pale blues and whites. "This," she said, voice ringing with conviction, "is what will help us win the war coming." No one dared interrupt her as she spoke. She looked over everyone present, heroes, officers, executives, her gaze sharp as a blade. "Our newest investment," she said softly, almost to herself. "And I will see to it personally that they become our greatest advantage." And the room, for the first time since the meeting began, fell into a stunned, breathless silence. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for more crossovers. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author ChiWriters on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.